Cancer actually emerges out of our own tissues when the conditions are just right. U.S. cancer risk in men, 1 out of every 2. Women, 1 out of every 3 will develop cancer sometime in their lifetime. Cancer actually needs the following conditions to begin to rise: hypoxia, which is low oxygen, low nutrition, and an acidic environment. With all that, it typically takes some type of an insult, which is usually some type of inflammatory process for cancer to begin to start to grow. When we look at some of the motivation behind why people are treated that way, the pharmaceutical market has a huge invested interest in cancer, and they don't want this golden egg to go away. Chemotherapy not only enriches but also induces cancer stem cells, and that's what actually starts cancer in the first place. Radiation will transform other cancer cells into treatment-resistant cancer stem cells. When we look at the leading cancer killers, the lung tops the list on both men and women. Actually, what would be next would be breast in women, prostate in men. Colon rectum would be next, and we go on down the line. If we look at the cancer facts and figures from 2008, they tell us they made a lot of progress since 1930. 1930 incidence of cancer is, actually death rates of cancer is on the left side of the screen, 2004 on the right side of the screen, and you can tell we have really not made any huge breakthroughs in the industry, or medicine at least. Here's the adjusted death cancer rates from the 1930 to 2004, and it does not look like we've really made much progress at all. When you look at some of the research that's out there, cancer does not arise from genetic factors. They're only a minor contribution to the onset of cancer. When we look at the risk factors, tobacco is on the highest part of the list. It kills 1 in every 2 of its users. And there are several other things below that: chemicals, food, genetics, hormones, infections, radiation, weight, and stress will all have a huge impact on cancers. When we look at smoking, lung cancer is increased by 23 times in male smoking, 13 times in female smoking. An interesting thing about smoking or any addictive drug use, all drugs of addicted quality increase dopamine activity. Dopamine is your feel-good hormone in the nervous system. Here's an interesting excerpt from the President's Cancer Panel showing where cancer actually comes from. Diet attributes to over 1/3 of all cancer instances. Tobacco, almost a full third. Sunlight is very interesting, is 10%. For those of you who like to use sunscreen only blocks out the UV light that causes your skin to burn, but it doesn't block out the UV light that causes cancer, and it's a real false hope for anyone that uses that. Several other factors that are in there: viruses, occupational is a pretty small amount. When we look at the majority of environmental factors, it alters what's now called the epigenome. Those are the things around the genes that cause them to express themselves in different ways. When we look at the epigenetic targets in cancer, those are the things around the genes. These are different pathways that go on within the liver, within protein formation, that will make things either healthy or not healthy. And there are several different things that will change our protein structures as they are being developed from the genes. The genes actually give the blueprint on how to make proteins, and any of these changes will change a huge amount of structure and function within cells. Plant nutrients will fight cancer epigenetic mechanisms by several different ways. Here's a chart on that. Cancer, the neoplasm is what cancer is. The neoplastic transformation must be viewed as an environmental process within the body. It's not something that just happens out of nowhere. Diet-related factors account for about 30% of cancers in the Western countries. Our Western-style diet is huge as far as that goes, and what she's holding here is a huge contributor to that. Researchers estimate that 80% of cancer patients are malnourished. That's a huge amount. Chemotherapy often increases the body's needs for proteins and other nutrients, and they never get it. Several reasons why. The gut's injured, food intake, food quality issues are two of the big real high ones. We have persistent toxic chemicals in the U.S. food supply. They're called POPs or POPs. Their residues are present in virtually all categories of every kind of food. Residues of 5 or more persistent toxic chemicals in a single food item are not unusual. And when you look at the instances of pharmaceutical use, it's gotten into our water table, and you just can't get away from the stuff, whether you take them or not. Mark Houston, a very well-known cardiologist, quote from him: malnutrition is the leading cause of disease in both emerging and developing countries, so no one's immune from it. Spectrum of health problems from calorie, protein undernutrition, and empty calorie overfeeding. When we look at our food supply, the chemically altered junk food triggers addiction, and that is altered throughout pretty wide spectrums. Another research article here concludes that adolescents overconsume fast foods regardless of whatever their body weight was. And the interesting thing is the food is made into drugs by the creation of hyper-palatable foods, or things that taste really good. It leads to a neurochemical addiction. Essentially, we have food engineers now that can create any kind of flavor, any kind of aroma in their kitchens. Those can be added to something like cardboard even, to make it smell and taste just like a roasted chicken, for example, and have no food value in it whatsoever. A huge amount of our boxed foods these days is chemically altered by these additives. After smoking, obesity is the highest preventable cancer risk. It does that by several different things. Your fat tissues create a lot of different hormones. Resistant on the left, that makes your cells resistant to insulin. Adiponectin, just below that, will alter your glucose and lipid metabolism. When there's not enough adiponectin, we cannot process glucose or lipids. Leptin is another big one. When leptin is disrupted, we never feel full. We will always feel hungry and keep eating. Then there's a host of other things along in here that have a lot to do with inflammatory process, and that leads itself into cancerous issues in an end stage. Essentially, cancers will arise from sites of infection, chronic irritation, and inflammation. Inflammatory cells are always a part of the cancer process. So one of the keys is to try and minimize inflammatory issues in a body. Cover article from Time Magazine, The Secret Killer Being Inflammation. Inflammation is a surprising link between inflammation, heart attacks, cancer, Alzheimer's, and most every other disease that's out there. Chronic stress will lead to premature aging of the immune system. It'll also shut down the adrenocortical axis, and that will burn out our body's ability to minimize inflammation. NK cells are their killer cells. Natural killer cells, part of your immune system. They're the most sensitive cells to suppress the effect of stress. When we look at stress, if we are stressed chronically, it starts to change our hormonal function. This is a chart of the adrenal hormone progression. If we look at DHEA, typically that's going to get converted into the hormones that make men, and women. If there's too much stress, that pathway will get pushed over into making your steroids to try and deal with inflammation instead. And we will cease to be men, we will cease to be women. When we look at further factors, the increase in breast cancer, 27% increase in the risk for breast cancer with each weekly serving of French fries. That's pretty sobering. When they tell pregnant women to eat whatever they want, when women eat a fatty diet when they're pregnant, it will affect themselves, their daughters, and their granddaughters. It changes the epigenetic expression of certain genes. Calorie restriction, on the other side, will extend or increase the lifespan of every animal that's out there. And it increases the ability to kill off cancer-forming cells. Cancer primarily feeds off of junk and sugar. Calorie restriction reduces cellular senescence. Senescence is the issue of cells getting weak and trying to die. So calorie restriction reduces the cells aging and dying. Plants nourish, alkalize, and oxygenate. They give us nitrogen oxide, which is a huge issue that's anti-aging, anti-inflammatory, prevents chronic disease, enhances performance and recovery. Current research shows that every step of cancer, that plant chemicals tend to reduce the likelihood of the cancer going to the next stage. A quarter of the population that consumes the fewest fruits and vegetables doubles their incidence rate of cancer. When we look at nitrogen oxide, it's the molecule of the year. It is huge in what it does for heart health, neural health, immune system health, and sexual function. Nitric oxide, the healthy nitric oxide, is what gives rectal tissues their function. That's the same thing that allows your blood vessels to relax to lower your blood pressure. There are two different pathways to make nitrogen oxide. The CNOS, or constitutive NOS, is the healthy stuff. The inducible NOS is, or nitrogen oxide, is what comes out of inflammation. It's 1,000-fold greater when we have chronic inflammatory issues, and it is destructive. It's the constitutive NOS that is healthy. Inflammation always devours nitric oxide, and that makes us so our arteries can't relax, our rectal tissues won't function, and we're not healthy at all. It's well accepted that nitric oxide is a component of several different plant phytochemicals that allow the plants to thrive and survive, and that way we can reap their benefit when we eat plants. Nitrogen supplementation isn't something we can do directly. Plant amino acids, primarily arginine, is huge as far as its ability to help us generate and regenerate nitric oxide. We need diversity to be able to be healthy as far as that goes. The more colors of fruit and vegetables we have, the more diverse we will have of the phytochemicals that are in those. To help prevent cancers, we need 4 to 13 servings of fruit and vegetables daily, depending on our energy needs. Now, when we look at the reality of cancer, less than 10% of breast cancers are due to hereditary mutations. That's sobering. BRCA mutation. This is a genetic mutation right here. When that exists, people are more vulnerable to hormones that come from the outside, especially oral contraceptives. A xeno is something that's foreign. So foreign estrogens come a whole bunch of different ways. Birth control pollution is huge. There's birth control residuals in the groundwater. It's in almost all drinking waters, whether you're taking it directly or someone else is using for convenience, and it makes the women toxic. Oftentimes they'll shut their cycles down for a year or more, depending on what kind they use. It can be very difficult for them to become fertile and pregnant after use of this for a long period of time. BRCA carriers that drink coffee tend to be more protected. That needs to be organic coffee. Coffee is one of the 3 most toxic crops grown in the world, so it's very important for coffee drinkers to drink organic coffee. 69% reduction in cancer for BRCA positive people. The Moore trial confirms that increased lifetime estrogen exposure increases breast cancer risk. They tried to do this trial by seeing what hormone replacement therapy did for women. They tried twice to do it. They had to ethically stop the trial because the very things they were trying to stop increased beyond ethical standards to allow them to continue. We look at the reality of the xenoestrogens or the foreign estrogens. We now have 15% of 7-year-old girls knocking on the doors of puberty. That's never normal. This is all from foreign estrogens coming into our food supply. There was a march in March 15th, 2012, where greenhouse workers were getting upset because they found out that they were exposed to pesticides that could lead to breast development in their daughters. And they didn't find, and those measurements were showing up 10 years later. DDT, another xenoestrogen, has predicted a 5-fold increase in the risk of breast cancer among women who were born after 1931. They banned DDT in our country, but it can still be used on plants in foreign countries, and we get most of our food from foreign countries, so you're getting DDT if it's grown south of the border. Back in the 1940s, a woman's lifetime risk of breast cancer was 1 in 22. Today it's 1 in 8. And it's not because of genetic issues. It's primarily because of toxic hormones. Estradiol is the one that tends to get the most toxic. When we look at increased risk in estradiol right here, or increased risk of breast cancer, it's over twice as likely to get cancer with women with toxic estrogens. The more weight someone has, the more likely to have toxic estrogens. The 2-OH estradiol and 2-OH estrone are healthy hormones. When there's a hormone in fat tissue called aromatase, it will convert the healthy estrogens and estradiols into toxic estrogens, which are carcinogenic, and they create too much tissue proliferation in the target tissues, which typically the uterus, the breast, the ovaries, reproductive tissues. Estrogens always need to be processed and excreted. That typically happens throughout the liver, and it's a very energy specific process. Vitamin use shortly after breast cancer diagnosis reduced mortality or death rates by close to 20%, and recurrence by 22%. ER beta, that's an estrogen receptor beta, is protective factor in breast cancer that can be increased by doing certain things. Phytoestrogens from soy is estrogen receptor beta proliferative, so it enhances that. So you look at when with breast cancer, soy food consumption was associated with almost a 30% reduction in the death rate and a little over 30% in reoccurrence. To see a world map of how that works, you look throughout Asia where soy is used quite a bit, and it's non-GMO, non-toxic soy. That's where we have the least incidence of breast cancer, where the most use of soy is. When we look at the prostate is the same thing as a woman's uterus. Typically, when a fetus hits about 7 weeks of age, it's male, it gets a shot of testosterone. The uterus will then drop down, wrap around the base of the urethra, and become the prostate. So it's just as sensitive to the estrogens as a woman's uterus is. The uterus is just easier to cut out. Estrogen plays a key role in about half of the prostate cancers. Here's a slide showing a Fox News issue, the prostate and the pill. The prostate cancer is highly linked to the use of pill because it's all gotten in our drinking water. When you look at androgens in prostate cancer, this is the myth that testosterone causes prostate cancer. Well, if that was the case, it would be 19-year-old boys getting prostate cancer rather than older men. It's contradictory at best, and it's not the idea just doesn't work. It really holds no water. Testosterone suppression also disrupts your immune system, and that creates inflammatory process going on in the male cells that lead to cancer. ER beta is protective in the prostate as well as it is in female tissues. Bisphenol A, another xenoestrogen or foreign estrogen, it reduces the normal circulating male hormones, and the aromatase will convert the circulating male hormones. The aromatase in fat tissue will convert the normal circulating male hormones into toxic estradiol and make him quite inflammatory. Coffee, once again, is a huge protection against that. Then we'll look at vaccinations. They play a role in carcinogenesis also. 64% of those who have measles virus antigens creating breast cancer. Other vaccinations show similar results. Here's another vaccination issue that's very common, giving a persistent risk for cervical cancer. H. pylori is a bacterial infection that goes on in the stomach. It typically will come when the stomach acid becomes too low. That happens to be in a third of the population, or 2/3 of the population all over the world. When there's H. pylori infection, the stomach can't produce the right amount of acid. It can't then digest the proteins properly. That inflames the whole gut. The gut becomes leaky. Whole proteins go out in the blood, cause inflammatory reactions. An inflammatory reaction is what excites the cancer when there's low nutrient, low oxygen, and acidic. Here's what the H. pylori looks like. Those tentacles actually screw themselves into the wall of the stomach and inhibits the ability of the stomach to produce stomach acid. Zinc carnosine is one of the things used to help inhibit the H. pylori from making more H. pylori. Deficiencies of vitamins mimic radiation in damaging DNA. which leads to cancer creating issues. So how do you resolve cancer? This is a huge question. It's the same thing that you need to do. You need to change the conditions of the body so that it goes away. We need to make the conditions just right for cancer to go away. And those conditions, well, there's strategies to detox, alkalize, oxygenate, give proper nutrients, and stop inflammation. That's going to require lifestyle changes. To do that, you need to have gut health evaluated, the organ systems evaluated, food intolerances evaluated. You need to alkalize the body with lots of fruits and vegetables, oxygenate by exercise and fruits and vegetables. Nutrients need to go there. We can't get all of our nutrients in our food supply, so we need to supplement them with good vitamins, minerals, things like that. And inflammation. We need to do all of the above along with exercise to help manage